Welcome to the Dr. Pat Show. Talk radio to thrive by. Powerful, inspiring, and coming to you live, bringing you stories of people like you and me, busting through and living life full out. Get ready to dare to wonder what your life would be like if you knew you could not fail.
Hi, my name is Craig Richardson, and welcome to a special edition of Mind to Heart. In this show, we take a journey from our logical, critical mind to the power center of our heart, where real transformation occurs. My guests help us understand our journeys by telling about their paths and lessons they've learned along the way. It's an honor for me today to be filling in for Dr. Pat, our fearless leader and founder of Transformation Radio. We wish her Godspeed in her recovery. Our health is one of the most important aspects of our lives. And when we are faced with serious illnesses and we approach it with faith, spirit, and an open heart, it can be remarkably transformational. My guest today, Kristina Baum, has been through such an experience. She was working away on a communications career in our nation's capital, and by any measure was enjoying great success. However, Kristina's life would change forever, as would the trajectory she would take, starting in 2012 when she was first diagnosed with melanoma. Instead of letting her illness get her down, Kristina faced her greatest challenge with vigor and courage, and in doing so lives a full and rich life today. She's also become a beacon of light and inspiration for others. Anyone who's met Kristina is immediately taken by her grace and her warmth. Her smile can light up any room, and there's a depth to her that's unusual. She's used her cancer illness, which reoccurred 2 additional times, to help others who struggle with the same illness. She is an outspoken for patients' rights, and using her professional background in national policy, she advocates for access to non-FDA approved drugs. And if that's not enough, she's become an avid runner and has successfully completed such marathons as the New York City. She runs with the intention of raising money for cancer research and will be taking her cause to Chicago later this year when she participates in that marathon. And by doing so, she becomes an inspiration for everybody she comes in contact with. So it's my pleasure now to bring in my guest, Kristina Baum. Kristina, welcome to Mind to Heart.
Thank you for having me, Craig.
Well, it's great to see you. I'm friends of yours on Facebook, so I noticed that you had just spent a few days of R&R in the sunshine. Where were you exactly?
I was in Turks and Caicos. I was with a bunch of girlfriends there, just celebrating a 40th birthday of one of my closest friends.
Well, it looked neat. I even saw a picture of you jumping off a cliff, so that must be part of as I described you, you've taken life with great vigor. So it's great to have you on here. So I'd like to start as I talked to you initially about the show. My show is about journeys. So I think the best place to start with you is the beginning. Can you give us a little bit of background on where you grew up, the type of family environment you had, and things like that?
Sure. So I grew up. I was born in Miami, Florida, and Florida kid. So both my parents raised me there, and my mom was pretty active, put herself through school, and my dad worked in the airline industry for his entire life. So grew up there, and I just grew up near the beach and the ocean, and with lots of sun, and it was a great time. And started riding horses when I was 9, so I did that for about 15 years as well. Went to high school in Sarasota, Florida, so on the other coast, so on the Gulf side, and it was a great time.
Yeah, and in Florida, it has that. I had cousins growing up. I grew up in the opposite end in the cold New England, and we used to love to go down there. They lived in Miami as well, and it just seems like that. That's such an active lifestyle. And what got you interested in traveling north to the nation's capital?
So I had gone to University of South Florida for my first 2 years of college, and then I actually got a scholarship, an equestrian scholarship, to transfer to a small school in Missouri, where I went my back 2 years. So in fact, that was, I think, the first time I actually saw it actually snow was when I went to college my junior year. So And then what was important was I started interning at the Capitol between my sophomore, junior summer. So that was my very first time. I interned for Congressman Dan Miller of the Florida Congressional 13th District.
Yep.
And so it was a short-term internship. I was there for maybe 4 weeks, but I had an absolute blast. It was an amazing office to intern with. And as an intern, I mean, this is going to definitely date myself, but email wasn't like the best like form of communication in a lot of ways. So there was not Blackberries or anything like that. So back then, whenever people wanted to invite interns to like a lunch or a dinner or anything like that, they would send a fax. So my job was to go and collect all the faxes and divvy it up to all the policy staff in the office. And that was actually a lot of fun because half the time the policy staff didn't want to go to any of these briefings or luncheons. And so I would get to go instead. So when you're 19 years old in the nation's capital, going to a little briefing, by the Council on Foreign Relations on Iraq Reconstruction sounded like the coolest thing ever. So that's kind of how I kind of cut my teeth on how Washington worked a little bit and getting to learn. It was that same summer I was invited to it was an intern series guest speaker situation that APAC did. And so they had at the time, he was at the time White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer, who was speaking. It was somewhere in DuPont, and it was this big ornate room. I can't remember where it was. And so I went, and basically it's just Ari Fleischer is up there answering all these rapid fire questions from all these college kids. And so, I mean, on every topic you can imagine. And I just remember thinking, this is amazing. Like, this guy is so talented. Like, he's answering these questions, but not like actually answering some of these questions, but you think he is. And
the Potomac two-step, right? Is that they call
yes, and right. And I mean, he did it flawlessly. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is an amazing talent to really craft words in a way that is just so surgical. And I'm also not good at math, so which as most communicators aren't. So
I can attest, yeah.
So I just thought, wow, this is amazing. And I was always really good. My scores were always good at the comprehension, reading, and words. So I'm like, well, maybe this is my thing. And so that's kind of what kicked off me being very interested in communications and in the political sphere. And then I went back and interned the following summer. I gave up a summer studying Spanish in Costa Rica
to
go back to DC.
You definitely were hooked then, right?
Yeah, so interned for Catherine Harris the following summer, who was the new incumbent for that same district. And it just kind of took off from there.
That's great. And then so you, that first experience and second clearly said that this is where I want to. I don't necessarily, I mean, I love horses and I love Florida, but this is where I want to go. And so you came there immediately following, is that right? Immediately following your graduation?
Yes. So after I graduated, I actually started working for the Mel Martinez Senate campaign, and then also with Bush Cheney 04 down in Florida. I started off as a volunteer, really, and really I put everything into that, and then they asked me to come on staff full time. So then I did that, and I was a field director down there, and we obviously won, which was great. So yeah. I was 1-0 for a long time with campaigns. So it worked out great. And I think from then it just kind of snowballed. So I then did kind of a little bit of a stint abroad in Brussels. And then that parlayed into me coming back to the Hill, where I was in LC for a little bit. And then I went back and was a reporter in Houston for a time doing energy.
Excuse me, what were you? Were you just a beat reporter? You were doing
so
covering a particular issue?
Yeah, so I worked for a trade publication on energy, specifically oil commodities, so all your petrochemicals. So it was a little bit more downstream, but it was very interesting work that I got to really empathize with reporters when they're trying to build sources and reach out for comment. And I mean, I was hung up on, I can't tell you how many times, by different people, like just trying to get information and be a good reporter.
Yeah, and I think that's important, obviously, now in your later career. So to have been on both sides of that aisle, you can see, and then you can also see, clearly, as you saw first with Ari Fleischer, as a reporter, you're not overly interested in playing dodgeball, are you? And so that's kind of the part of that cat and mouse game. So that what year roughly was that you came back to Washington?
So that was probably about 2006.
And then you continued working in energy issues at that time?
So yeah, I was back here. I was in LC in 2006, went back, I went to Houston, was an energy reporter there. And then I didn't come back to DC until about 2010, I guess. And I actually came back up here to work at a church. So I was on staff full time with McLean Bible Church doing mission work there.
That's not too far from me. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was there doing that. And then long story short, I soon realized that working at a church wasn't going to pay my student loans. So
Sure, absolutely.
so I needed to make some money. And so that kind of moved into, I went back to being a reporter for a little bit.
Great. Well, we're at about 2010. I think I'm going to go ahead and take a break now, because what I'd like to do is from the second segment on is then get into your cancer and then how that's really impacted your life. So when we come back to Mind to Heart, we'll get into Kristina's story, picking it up in 2012. And can you give an email address or a website or something, so if people want to get a hold of you?
Sure. You can just reach me on Twitter at Kristina Baum. Also my Instagram, I have an Instagram that's public, which is called at KBaumRuns. And that's at KBAUM runs, RUNS.
Great. And for those who want to get a hold of me, my website is craigericardson.com. So let's take a short break here and we'll pick you up on the other side. Thank you, Kristina. Hi, welcome back to Mind to Heart with Craig Richardson, filling in today for Dr. Pat. Kristina, can you give your Twitter handle out again for folks?
Sure. It's at Kristina Baum, and that's Kristina with a K, last name Baum, B-A-U-M. So it's just at Kristina Baum, all no spaces, no characters.
Okay, great. And my website again is craigericardson.com. Kristina, before the break, you had given us the exciting history of how you came to Washington as an intern and then returned, and then we were roughly in that pre-period. Can you walk us through how the cancer diagnosis happened, and how all that experience was? Because I imagine I grew up in Washington. I know or didn't grow up, but I've been here, and I know you sort of live a happy-go-lucky life. And can you walk us through a little bit about the symptoms and how that all happened?
Yeah, so it was 2012, and I had just started a new job with a public relations firm. So when I was working at the church prior to that, I didn't even have health insurance. So it was really a miracle that I had accepted this job where I could have health insurance. And so I had just kind of this spot on my arm. It was colorless. It would look, I guess, just like kind of like a bug bite or maybe like a wart, something like that. And I had gone to my primary care just because I had a cold, just kind of your average cold. And so I said, hey, will you take a look at this? And so she said, she's like, I don't like the way that looks. Like, let's make a plan to remove it. And I said, okay, great. Well, I'd started this new job, so I just kind of kept putting it off and putting it off. And then about 3 months later, it was about September, and things were starting to get a little chilly, in the DC area. And my friends and I, we were all going to go out dancing, just like country dancing for one time. And I have this cute sleeveless shirt that I wanted to wear, but it was kind of getting bigger. And I was just I didn't like the aesthetics. I was just like, I don't like this thing on my arm. It's getting bigger. And I almost said to myself, like, well, it's almost going to be winter. I don't want to take time off work to go deal with it. I'll just start wearing more sleeves. Thank God I didn't do that. So finally, I just made a plan on, I guess, like a Tuesday to go take care of it. And my boss was like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Is everything fine? I was just like, yeah. Like, it's just, I'll be in and out, like no big deal. So I go there and they just did a punch biopsy. And that was last I thought of it. I couldn't care. I totally forgot about it.
So for you, you didn't think it was cancer. It was just something
Absolutely not.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, totally, like, just no big deal. So then about 6 days later, so I actually had worked a full day, like things were kind of crazy, and I had met a reporter from Bloomberg actually for lunch, and I don't know why that just had stood out to me because I was just so busy. I mean, you know how it is. And so then about 4:45, I got a call, and it was my primary care doctor. And I just remember thinking like, well, my doctor never calls me, so this is really strange. And I was like, why is she calling me? And then I thought, oh, like, oh yeah, I had that test done. And then I started to get a little nervous. And then she said, well, it's melanoma. Well, I didn't even know what melanoma was at the time. And she just starts talking, and then it just starts to feel like when you're in that phone conversation, it just sounds like Charlie Brown teacher, where you're just kind of picking out certain words. And I feel like most cancer patients will say very similar. So I remember she dropped the word surgeon, and then she drops the word oncologist, and it's all kind of fast. I'm trying to write things down, and I don't know what any of this means, and like different numbers. And so she's giving me a referral to a different clinic, and it just all sounded really serious. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I knew like stages. I was like, well, what stage is this? And she says, we don't know. And I was like, well, what are you saying exactly? She's like, Kristina, you have cancer. And I was just remember like that hit me between the eyes. And I was just like, started crying. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this is that phone call that you just never expected to get. And I mean, at the time I was only 30 years old. So I was obviously shocked, didn't know what to do. So I just tried to compose myself, and I reached out to my boss. I walked down there, and he'd seen that I was crying, and he invited me to come in, and I just started crying. And he was just like, take all the time you need, do whatever you need to do. He's like, let's call him right now. So we called the clinic, and of course they close at 5. So I had to wait all the way until the next day to like even reach someone to schedule my next appointments. So it was a really tough day. And then of course, after I talked to my boss, I had to deal with calling each of my parents, and talking to them, which is a difficult conversation because they're just as confused and unsure as I was, what's in store.
Had you had any of this in the family before, or was this?
No. Yeah, just me.
Probably being with the fair skin in the sun, probably, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that must be hard because it's, normally they get those phone calls or check-ins and how are you doing, and I got this promotion or whatever, and just like you, it's you had to relive all that again and again.
Yeah, so went through those same phone calls 3 times. So yeah.
And other than sort of, I can imagine that first day or even longer, you sort of feel gut punched. But it sounds like you approached it sort of in a way that you would any kind of policy issue. What are my options? What is that how you approached it? I mean, what does this look like? What is it? What should I do? Or
yeah, I mean, the way that the clinic had set it up, they put all your appointments in one day. So you meet with your surgeon, your oncologist, and your oncological dermatologist. And so you kind of go through the whole gamut, and they kind of walk you through what the recommended course of action is. So for me, they recommended immediate surgery to remove it, which is they call a wide excision surgery, and to do what they call a sentinel lymph node biopsy. So for me, it was a pretty extensive surgery because I guess my tumor was rather large. So it was a very long day. I was pretty exhausted, and you have to fast for most of that time. And the results of that first surgery, the pathology kind of determines what they do next. And then for me, my sentinel lymph node had cancer. So we had to do a second surgery that was more extensive, where they did what they call left axilla dissection. Actually, a lot of breast cancer patients have the same surgery, where they go in and they remove the entire sleeve of lymph nodes on one side. So I had 18 lymph nodes removed altogether. And so fortunately, none of those tested positive with the additional one. So my first diagnosis, I was stage 3A. And at the time, there were no advanced immunotherapies approved for stage 3A. So I had to take an old drug called interferon alpha 2B, which was miserable. So that drug was awful. And they use it for a few other things now still, I think, maybe hepatitis and several others. But I mean, like, I lost most of my hair. The
Wow.
fatigue is just terrible. Like, you feel nauseous and sick all the time. You basically feel like you have the flu. And it's like that for about a year. And you do about a month of it intensive in the hospital where you're getting it every day. And then you get it every other day until you reach like 9 or 10 months. So I could only last 6 months. I finally self-withdrew. I was just like, I can't take this anymore.
Yeah, this is not, I mean, the quality of life must be, and you were
Exactly.
still trying to work during this time, were you not? I mean,
So during the first one, when I did the month intensive, my employer encouraged me just to take time off work. So I did that. And then I came back in about a month later, so only 1 month. And then I continued to try to work. And then we started having some issues where we thought it might have popped up in my lungs. And so my employer just kind of gave me a few months to just recuperate and kind of physically get back to where I need to be. And so that was really helpful to have that time. So yeah, it was it was a lot, but that was the only time I'd ever taken off work for cancer specifically.
yeah, and because it's important, right? Isn't it important part of the treatment is to be back as a normal schedule and to be around because you don't, otherwise you sort of sit at home, right? And you know,
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah. And it's a I think a lot of ways it can be more mentally challenging than physical.
mm. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you know, and I suppose that you meet there, you found a support group, I assume, or through some of this thing, or did that come out?
Yeah, so the first time I went through cancer, I did start attending a young adults with cancer support group. I think it's Connected with Life with Cancer, which is connected to Inova. And they were great. It was so important to connect with other people that were in the same walk of life as I was. Because I do think when you're in a young adult with cancer, you're dealing with different things. I mean, you still have like a lot of work life left in you. I mean, dating and just all these other factors. Like most of your friends don't know anyone with cancer.
Yeah.
So I think just trying to navigate those issues were it was really important to me to just have someone where I just didn't feel alone in those struggles. And it was really life-giving to me to weather that with a group of people. A few I'm still like really good friends with to this day. So, but the flip side of that is when you're in a support group like that, there are people that will die. So
Yeah, that does.
so I have definitely lost a good chunk of friends along the way to cancer. So it's it's bittersweet, but I would say the benefits outweigh the risks.
Okay, well, we're going to take another break because this is the part that we really want to get into a little bit more, and also your own personal faith, because I think this has to be part of the mix if to somebody who was tackled this the way it is. So when we get back, we'll talk a little bit more about that after the
Sounds
break.
great.
Thank you. Hi, welcome back to Mind to Heart with your guest host today, Craig Richardson, filling in for Dr. Pat. And my guest is Kristina Baum, who was talking before the break about how she had been diagnosed in her early 30s with cancer and how that had sort of sent her on a trajectory. Kristina, when we went to the break, you were talking about the importance of the support group that you had around you, and and sort of pointed out that the tough part about that is that you do lose soldiers along the way, people that you're close to. I imagine another thing that was sustains you is some type of faith or spirituality. And can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, I think to really talk about that, I think it's more like how my faith was weathered through all three diagnoses. Like they were all very different. In terms of faith, like my first one, I would say was I don't want to say easy, like faith wise, but it was definitely a lot easier to weather, I think, in comparison to the other two. it was just kind of straightforward. Like I felt like I was in a really great place with my faith, like when I got first diagnosed. And I remember that day, all I wanted was people to pray for me. So I emailed pretty much just anyone I could that was in my address book. I just kind of wrote out a little update of what was going on with me and people I hadn't even talked to in a while. I was just really desperate for prayer. And I mean, nothing like this had ever happened to me, so I didn't know what that meant. And I just wanted support and people to really like seeking the Lord for me. So, um, and that just kind of snowballed into I just felt like this rally of support the whole first 3 months of that first diagnosis. And it was amazing. Like so many people like I hadn't heard from in forever reached out and were just so kind. But then I do think that some of the pitfalls, and a lot of cancer patients talk about this, is that you get people that like kind of come in hot and they'll do like one really nice thing and then they like zip on out and you never hear from them again. And so with that, I think, I mean, I'll try to be like succinct, but because I could talk about it forever, but it really made me think of just how I loved on the mission field and nothing against short-term missions. I think short-term missions are amazing, when used correctly, and they're a great tool in furthering the gospel. But I know like in some of the short-term work that I'd done, I would like get shuttled into this like third world country and like love on these kids for a week, who didn't even have parents. And then when I'm getting ready to leave, I'm like peeling an 8-year-old off of me who's like screaming and crying. And like, it's hard to like go back, disrupt your life and find enough money to go back all the time. So, and I just kind of felt like, wow, like I've done that myself, where I've gone in and done something big and then like I zip right back out. And like, that's just not how I want to love like long term. So like, I'd say like in my first diagnosis, that was really more the tangible impact for me, is that it really helped me understand like what does compassion mean in the New Testament. Like the Greek word for compassion in the New Testament means to suffer with. And so how am I suffering with my brothers and sisters in the faith, like, or people in general? Like I really just wanted to love better and love well this side of heaven while I still have time. So now is a time where I can do that, and that's probably gonna look like some hard investment. There's gonna be like a lot of iron sharpens iron. There's gonna be challenges to investing in loving people well in the way that God calls us to love. And that's not always like zipping in and then zipping out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all, and I think from the other side of that too, and I've been obviously on that side, sometimes it's from that person's perspective, they just don't know what to do anymore. And I think particularly those people, which I tend to be a little bit, if you're empathetic, it's sometimes you feel that pain so intensely of somebody else. And so you're a little bit at a loss, I think. And so I think from your perspective, you probably did have that core group of people, and some were most likely people who had cancer themselves, but there were probably other people maybe that you didn't even expect that are still with you now that you didn't expect that
Oh
would.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, having cancer, it's such a raw place to be, like you are trying to like mentally like wrap your head around this huge life-changing event. And I will say like after 3 months, like, and again, like I was a young person, so it's like a lot of young people aren't used to having friends that have cancer. So
Yeah.
a lot of people like don't understand, like, oh, why are you still dealing with cancer? You already had surgery, it's already removed. And it was like, it's not that simple.
Yeah, it
So
was real.
but like some of the older people like totally get it. They're like, oh wow, this is a long haul situation, so I do think like there's like an age component to it. But I will say like, like certainly there's some people that had just weathered all of it with me. And it's just, people who've kind of seen me in those like walks of life are just so near and dear to my heart. And just understand like what I've been through and how hard it is and how raw it is. And just like, you feel so helpless and you feel so needy, and that's like needy is such an uncomfortable feeling for so
Yeah.
many people. So like no one wants to feel needy, so that's like, it was just kind of a tough part in that way. And the second and third diagnosis, I struggle with my faith in different ways, but the first one was just like, it was kind of like, all right, we're getting your feet wet, and then we're just gonna start throwing bombs at you.
Yeah. I was wondering if, and I'm reminded, are you familiar with the movie Forrest Gump? Probably.
Yes.
Sure. So, there's that scene with Lieutenant Dan's up on the mast and he's screaming basically at God based in, and it was in the middle of a hurricane. He's like, is this all you got? He's like taunting him. I mean, did you have that moment or moments where you're like, second or third diagnosis? I mean, what's going on here? I've done everything by the book. Did you have those kind of falling out or those fist fights with God somewhere along the line?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it was like more in the second diagnosis because that one was much more serious and we didn't know if I was going to respond to therapy. In the second one. And even the third one was even more serious than that. So I think it's more just kind of like, why would you have me go through this so many times, God? And like you shake your fist at God, and like why does it feel like nothing's consistent? Like I don't understand. And it's just so scary, like I mean, the third time when I had the brain tumor, melanoma tumor in my brain, my doctor said, he was just like, yeah, I don't, he's like, yeah, you might die. That's a very real possibility. And people with the genetic makeup of the tumor I have don't live very long. So, I mean, maybe like 6 to 12 months. And so, I mean, I was dealing with very real questions like, am I going to outlive the shampoo in my shampoo bottle? And like, that's just terrifying. And so just Lord, like, why? Like, what is going on? And what do you want with my life? Like, how is this glorifying you, God? And just like a gazillion questions like that. And I think it's just, you have to kind of rest in the not knowing, which is so uncomfortable for a lot of people. And you just kind of have to rest in what does achievement, because I'm an achiever. So like, what does achievement look like for God? It's just really just trusting him and resting in him. And sometimes that's just, that in of itself is so uncomfortable because in our society, we want to like fix it. We want to do something about it and change it. And that's just not always what God has like called us to do. I mean, he created us to literally be asleep 1/3 of our lives. So, so that means like, that's clearly like a big deal to him. So sometimes just like resting in him is the best way we can give him glory with our lives.
And like Lieutenant Dan, did you have a moment of, sort of where you had that wrestling match, or did you have some peace afterwards? I assume you did. I mean, you look, you're generally a peaceful person.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's a daily struggle or walk, I guess, like to just constantly look at it. I mean, now that I feel like I'm on the other side of it, it's more like looking back, and what I'm trying not to fall into now is like what would my life have looked like had I never had cancer? How would my life be different? Would I be like a vice president of a company, or like I don't know, like what that might look like. So it's hard not to like fall into that trap of like those questions, but really
Yeah.
just
What if? Yeah.
yeah, because it's definitely not a path like I chose for myself. So, but I
Right.
just have to trust. Like one movie I'll tell you is Soul Surfer.
What's the name of
Which
it?
Soul Surfer.
I'll have to look that up.
So it's a movie about Bethany Hamilton, and she loses her arm in a shark attack. But anyways, at the end, she basically says, "I've been able to love even more people, like having had this happen, than I would if I had both arms." And
Mm.
that's kind of how I felt, where it's like I've been able to do more with my life with these challenges versus had I never had them, I guess. So so for that I'm grateful, and I just want more hope for more patients that are out there that that had been struggling just like me.
Well, you are, as I said, a phenomenal inspiration for people. And when we get into our last segment, I want to get into a little bit more because you have a race coming up, and
Mhm.
you've been raising money for research, and you've been a patient's advocate. So I want to hear a little bit more of that, in terms of, because you are literally turning your situation into grace and love for other people in ways that are amazing. Can you give out your Twitter handle again?
Sure, it's at Kristina with a K, Kristina Baum, all together. So at Kristina Baum, that's my Twitter handle. And then Instagram, my DMs are open at kbaumruns. Yeah.
Run, Forrest, run, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And to get a hold of me, it's my website is craigerichandson.com. And when we get back, we'll spend our last segment with Kristina. Thank you. Hi, welcome back to Mind to Heart with your guest host today, Craig Richardson. I'm filling in, as you know, for Dr. Pat and her show. And I'm really delighted to have with me today Kristina Baum, who was telling us through her experiences with 3 times with cancer. And Kristina, before the break, you were talking about some of the things you were doing, starting to do or had done, through your outreach, that your way basically of giving back. Can you talk a little about patients advocacy was one, and then all of a sudden also what you're doing with the FDA non-approved drugs?
Yeah. So, basically right now I've kind of parlayed a lot of my athletic goals. So during or after my second diagnosis, I felt so weak that I just knew I never wanted to feel like that again. I really wanted to feel strong, and and I really got on board with just having like women and certainly men too, just like feel strong and feel good, feel capable. I couldn't even like lift my arms, like wash my hair over my head because the drugs had like taken so much from me. So I I just started off small, I started off with just like trying to do one little like modified push up and then like walk a mile. And then like I would start on weekends turning that into more and more and it just slowly build from there. But you just have to start with one step, right?
Yeah.
So, and one step can turn into two and two turns into four and it just grows. And so for me, I committed to doing my first triathlon, which was one of the hardest things I've ever trained for. So I'm not a competitive swimmer at all. I thought, I was like, well, how hard can it be? Michael Phelps makes it look so easy, right? So, how hard is that? So it's actually really hard. So I swam my first 25 yards and I thought I was going to die. So like getting the breathing down and all that. But anyways, I did it. And so I just thought, well, I could probably do this again. And running is more my passion. But I still enjoyed all of them. So I just kind of kept training. And so 2018, I just made a commitment to myself. I was just like, look, I'm going to run as many half marathons as I can. And so I ended up doing 7 total.
Oh my gosh.
And because I moved back to DC during that time. And then I did my first marathon. I did the Marine Corps Marathon in October, which was so great. I had wanted to do that. And training was fantastic. I had the best time. It was hard, but I loved it. So I just kind of kept on going from there. So now I've run about 3 marathons and an ultra. I did my first 50K this past fall. And so now I'm training for Chicago. But my main message that I just want people to know, specifically cancer patients, is that, you can do hard things. And the best way that we beat cancer is by how we live our lives. Once you let cancer start beating you at your quality of life, that's when it starts to win. So when I was on treatment, even like radiation, and like a couple years ago, there were some days where all I could do was get out of bed and get myself dressed. And if that's all I could do, that's okay. To me, that was a workout that day.
Wow.
And then maybe the next day we'll see what my body could give me. Maybe the next day I could get up and I can do, maybe 5 squats, air squats, no weights, just that's it. And if that's what my body will give me, then great, that's better than 0. So, and it was just, that's how I had to live my life for a long time, and it really is just listening to your body and what your body will give you, but you need to be able to like push yourself a little too. Not to the point of like complete exhaustion or pain, but I think you just have to be smart. And really just build strength where you can in terms of what your body will allow you to do. So that's how I had to manage it. And some races were easier than others. Like some days it felt like I had like a windsock behind me. Like that's how hard it was to run. My times dramatically dropped. And that's just, it was awful, but it's just something I had to deal with. It's just part of it. So I feel like I'm still trying to recover my speed a little bit still even, but I'm just thankful that I have the ability to get out there and run and to do what I love, even if it is just to stress relief. And I'm probably, never going to be like an Olympic time qualifier or anything like that.
You're already a champion that you're getting out there and doing all that. And there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, and when is Chicago? When is the actual race?
So Chicago is October 10th this year.
October 10th.
Yep.
And I know if they get a hold of you, they can, if you get that Twitter out again, there's a link that you can, because you're raising money for that as part of
That's correct. Yes. Yep. So I'm raising money for Jack's fund. Jack Marston is a man who was in his 40s who died of melanoma. So now his wife, Sharon, runs Jack Marston Fund. So the whole fund's purpose is to raise money for melanoma research. They're based in the Chicago area. And so they're my official charity partner for the Chicago Marathon this year.
Great. And how many are on his team? Don't they have like teams and all? Or
yes. So I think we're 20 maybe.
Oh, that's
so somewhere around there, but I think there's still bibs available. So if you're signing up for Chicago, definitely consider running for Jack's Fund. It's a fantastic group. It comes with a coach. We do weekly meetings. It's been an amazing community of folks who just care about fighting melanoma and who also care about running. So, which are two of my favorite things. So,
yeah. That. And I got to ask you, so where are you? And so you've been diagnosed 3 times. So where are you now in with the cancer?
Yeah, so I'm doing really good right now. So I am, as what they call NED, or no evidence of disease. So as of right now, as we know it, there's no cancer in my body. Praise God. Then I get monitored every 3 months. So I get brain MRIs every 3 months, and I get CTs every 3 months. And then I have derm checks along the way. So I have a CT next week, on the 31st. So whatever day, I think that's a couple weeks. So I'm doing good with that. And I actually signed up to get my COVID vaccine today.
Oh, so, okay. I was going to ask you, because obviously you probably had to stay out of a lot of that stuff, I guess, because of the being a cancer survivor.
Yes. So it's actually been really challenging for me to get a vaccine. Even being in a part of zip code and with my history. So DC's made it a little tougher, but fortunately, Hopkins contacted me this morning, and I have now been scheduled for my first dose of vaccine. So I'm excited, and one less thing, hopefully, I have to worry about.
Yeah. And are these 3-month checkups still fairly, I mean, they must be a little bit heart and throat kind of thing, right? Every time you go, because it must be still.
Yeah, the CTs I feel like are a little easier to deal with now. The brain MRIs are much harder just because, brain metastases is much more serious. So when melanoma reaches your brain, it's really hard to get it to go away permanently. So it's definitely always going to be in the back of my mind. I'm always afraid if it's going to return or come back. I mean, every little like headache or symptom, it's hard not to let that thought enter your head that this could be something more serious. My doctor has been fantastic. So he's just encouraged me that, hey, look, give yourself some grace. Like this is just probably how it's going to be the rest of your life. You're just going to have this fear that's just sitting there. So I try not to let it consume me. Certainly exercise and running helps a lot. Yeah. But I mean, all I have is today, and the best I can give today is what God has given me. So.
Well, and that's a wonderful attitude, I think, to live by. And we only have about a minute or so left. I think what impresses me so much is that you've taken this, holistically, you've taken it mind, body, and soul, which I really think is the only way that, that you can take something as traumatic as this. And in doing so, you've now been, as I said, a beacon or a light for others. Can you leave our listeners with any last minute thoughts? And then again, how to get a hold of you and find this race site?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, if you exercise or if you don't exercise, get out and do it. I mean, I remember just thinking, man, I wish I could just get out and go for a walk just because I can. So I think so many people take their physical ability for granted these days. I mean, God gave us the ability to walk and run and do physical activity. It really is a celebration of the life God has given us and the ability that He's given us. So I think just embrace it. And I mean, just do it. It's just one of the best ways we can beat cancer every single day, for your friends and for yourself. Just get out there and do it and celebrate who He's made you to be. And if you want to reach me and continue the conversation at all, you can reach me on Instagram at kbaumruns or on Twitter at Kristina Baum.
Well, Kristina, I really appreciate it. You're a hero. What you've been through, as I said, an inspiration, and really, I hope people that listen today will contact you, because it's what you've done in terms of turning that adversity is really remarkable. And I really thank you for appearing here with me today. And also, I want to thank Dr. Pat for allowing me to fill in for her, and we look forward to having her return quickly. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. This was a treat.